Hi, this is Stuart Allen from Batman Bad Blood, and you are now entering the fan base.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. This is a special edition of the podcast as we are doing a Fanbase Feature panel discussion on the recently released addition to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Avengers: Infinity War. Joining me, as always, we have a wonderful group of panelists, starting with Justin Peniston. Hello, Justin.
Hi.
We have Claire Thorne. Hello, Claire.
Good morning.
We have Bryant Dillon. Hello, Bryant.
Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's good.
All right,
Thanks
excellent.
for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
Great.
I
Every
think we should
time.
acknowledge the donuts in the room as well because
donuts?
And donuts.
Yes, I was like Iron Man today. I flew out there and got donuts for everyone.
That's very
Save
kind of you.
Save the world.
It seems like something Iron Man does at the Avengers meeting.
I'm
Monthly
this
meetings, quarterly
apartment's
meetings?
greatest hero.
I don't know, he's a pretty fit
Mightiest
person.
hero.
I don't know that Iron Man eats donuts. He's pretty fit.
Wait a minute, he goes to a donut shop in Iron Man 2. He's one of the few characters we see eating a donut.
He also goes for shawarma, though.
Yeah,
That's
he's
true.
constantly,
And that was his first shawarma ever.
He's very concerned with where you're eating next. Always. So.
I'm just going to bring it back. Hi. My name is Barbra Dillon. I am the editor-in-chief of Fanbase Press. I will be your guide for today's panel discussion. But before we get started, a huge spoiler warning. If you have not yet seen Avengers: Infinity War, please be warned. There will be spoilers throughout. So with that warning in mind, Bryant, would you tell us a little bit about the film?
Sure thing. Iron Man, as we discussed earlier, Thor and Hulk and the rest of the Avengers unite to battle their most powerful enemy yet, the evil Thanos. During the villain's galaxy-spanning and bloody journey to collect all 6 Infinity Stones, we learn more regarding Thanos, his beliefs, and his relationship to the one thing he loves in the universe, his daughter Gamora. Many years ago, Thanos begged the rulers of his home world to take heed of the growing population and limited resources, proposing a random and quote-unquote humane execution of 1/2 of the population to save the other half. Rejected by his people and labeled mad, Thanos watched his civilization crumble under its own weight till he was the only one left. Years later, on his quest to bring his ideology of balance through genocide to the rest of the galaxy, he crosses paths with Gamora as a child, made newly an orphan by her adoptive father and his armies. While Gamora eventually left her abusive father to join the Guardians of the Galaxy, Thanos' plan to gather the Infinity Stones continued, with his ultimate plan being to erase half of all the life that exists with a snap of his fingers. Convinced this horrific action is necessary for the survival of the universe, Thanos' belief is so strong in this mission that he even kills Gamora when it becomes necessary to do so in order to achieve his final goal. Despite the combined efforts of the Avengers, the Guardians of the Galaxy, Wakanda's armies, and more, Thanos defeats everyone who stands against him, and eventually kills Vision, retrieving the final Infinity Stone he seeks from the android's forehead, and now, able to bend all reality to his will, delivers the fatal snap of his fingers. Half of all life across the universe disintegrates, including Star-Lord, Drax, Groot, Mantis, Scarlet Witch, Bucky Barnes, Black Panther, Falcon, and more. Peter Parker begs to stay as he vanishes in a broken Tony Stark's arms, and Doctor Strange, who earlier looked into the future and reported to the team that they had exactly one single chance of success in thousands when it came to defeating Thanos, simply tells Tony to remember that this had to happen as he too fades into nothing. The film ends with Thanos awakening on another planet, sitting down and smiling in satisfaction. In the post-credits scenes, Nick Fury attempts to place a call on his mobile as he and Maria Hill, amongst others, disintegrate. The mobile falls to the ground and displays the red and blue star insignia of Captain Marvel.
On his mobile.
I don't know what that was. It didn't look like a cell phone exactly.
Yeah,
It looked like
yeah.
a weird
I assumed it was a
Blackberry.
weird shield cell phone.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Shield Blackberry. Shieldberry.
There you go.
Maybe he still has a pager?
It did look like a pager. He is old.
If he's getting in touch with Captain Marvel,
From the 90s?
yeah, maybe he has to go retro.
It's like
I don't know.
I can only contact her through my official Captain Marvel page.
Who knows on on that synopsis, by the way, because that was a heck of a lot of a movie in one page of synopsis.
Well, thank you.
I'm shocked you achieved that.
I've had a lot of experience over the last year or so.
Well, what were everyone's general reactions to the film? Justin, we'll start with you.
I'll start with a caveat. It's obviously, this film is obviously the beginning of a story.
Yes.
And so it's hard to judge it too much without it having been completed. Mm-hmm. That said, I found it thoroughly enjoyable. I thought it was executed remarkably well. There were very small, niggly things that popped out to me here and there, but for the most part, I thought it was tremendously well executed. And it just cemented for me the ability of Marcus and McFeely and the Russos to tell these big, insane action stories, but still ground them in a certain level of intimacy and character, and to make these wonderful, explosive action scenes pay off in an emotional way. Mm-hmm. It was really, I was pleasantly surprised. I would say the most effective thing about the movie for me was, I mean, you already went over the list of characters who died at the end, and a lot of them are characters that we know have sequels in the offing. Sure. We know that there's a new Spider-Man movie coming out in 2019. We know there's no way they don't make a Black Panther sequel.
Exactly.
You know, that's a license to print money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean,
best possible decision right now in the MCU. Kill T'Challa.
You know, we know these characters are not dead.
Right.
And yet those losses still had a real emotional impact. Mm-hmm. You know, Spider-Man's in particular.
Absolutely.
You know, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
That was, I mean, watching this kid, who you know is a kid, you know, plead that he doesn't want to go.
And
that,
apologize again.
Oh, it was...
Well, and also to see Iron Man, who we've seen plagued by this, whether you agree with his decisions throughout the course of the films, plagued with this idea that eventually my friends are going to die in my arms,
oh,
you know,
yeah.
and then seeing it come to
Pass,
reality.
yeah. And they gave that additional weight by telling you at the opening of the movie that, you know, Iron Man, Tony wants to be a dad.
Right.
Yeah.
And they've already established that in a very real way, Peter Parker is sort of a surrogate son for him, you know? And so to have that emotional beat and have it land, even, again, knowing, as I do, nerd that I am, that, there's
a Spider-Man Homecoming 2 on the schedule.
Yeah, you know.
You can't do that without Spider-Man.
But it still was it was a very effective beat, and that speaks volumes about how well executed it was. Mm-hmm. These guys are firing on all cylinders when it comes to making these movies. That's my feeling.
Yeah. Claire?
Well, I think to bounce off the point that Justin just made, that and add to that, I think there were two enormous obstacles, right, that this story had to achieve. They had to achieve a story that's the front half of the story and is not going to be resolved, and they had to achieve a story that brought together dozens of other story threads and do it in a way. And my biggest fear in the movie was that it was going to feel so jumbled in their attempt to bring all of these groups of people together in introducing characters over and over and over again who we haven't seen together on the screen yet. And yet, at the same time, move forward a simple, single-thread, cohesive narrative. And I think that they accomplished that so well. And you know, I've heard other people, critics, reviewers, etc., you know, bring up the point over and over again that you have such a huge pantheon of characters that you're obviously going to miss out on time that you want to spend.
Sure.
And this is probably the fact that I'm satisfied, is that I got to spend a lot of time with Thor in this movie. And I can imagine that if you're even an Iron Man fan or a Captain America fan, you're not quite as, like, you didn't get the screen time this time. Although
they're still all got fantastic moments, I would say. You know, some were favored or with screen time a little bit more.
And I imagine that the next movie, I'm not going to get my Thor time. Right, I got that in this movie.
You were left with all the original Avengers, so you might...
Well, I'm just saying that I think that the narrative shift is going to go to, okay, now we have to talk about Iron Man and Cap
Sure.
and resolving that, and that's fine. That's that spend time with them.
Of course.
I'm not going to get the same kind of narrative time that I got with
Sure.
Thor, probably in the second movie, and that's how you have to balance these things out. But it still was just so well orchestrated. It felt like you spent just enough time with these various groups of people that they brought together to really feel like they weren't just mashing two people together.
Sure.
But that you also got good emotional moments between those people. You got emotional moments between Thor and, I can't even call him Rocket anymore, Thor and Rabbit? Are we just going to say that from now on? You got emotional
Oh man,
moments.
that should be a comic.
Yeah.
Thor and Rabbit.
Yeah, you got really poignant emotional moments between Iron Man and Doctor Strange and Peter Parker, and right down the list. So all of that was extraordinarily satisfying to me. And there's a lot of other reasons why I like the movie. I think there's some things where I have questions, like you were saying, Justin. There's little tiny niggly things where I'm not even sure I know what happened to some people, and I just that's the stuff
Sure.
that we're going to spend 3 months, on the internet debating.
Or a year. I mean, until the next one comes
Yeah.
out,
Yeah. Although, to bring one up, just because it's about the specific end of the movie, and I thought of it as we were going through the synopsis, I did read a very interesting article about a theory on the end of the movie.
Well, let's come back to
You
that.
wanna come back to that? I will
Yeah, because
hold
I want
it.
to make sure we get everybody.
Have a good theater.
Yes. Bryant,
Sure,
what were your
sure.
general thoughts?
I guess what I would say, and this is something I try not to say because I feel like it's one of those oversaid things, kind of like calling someone you don't like Hitler, or saying like this is the best Marvel movie ever or whatever. But I legitimately, the more I think about it, this film feels the closest to the feeling an audience might have had or experienced when watching Empire Strikes Back. And I think the reason I say that, I was resistant to that, but why I come to that is I really I wasn't sure exactly. I thought I enjoyed the film when I left. I wasn't sure exactly how I felt about it, because it was this thing of like, this felt like an awesome experience, but I'm also like depressed, and I sort of sat with it for a few days and was just stunned by how much I was like intrigued and fascinated by Thanos and reviewing his story in my head. And it made me feel like what had to be a similar transition, where Darth Vader goes from how an audience experiences him in A New Hope as this sort of faceless figure, almost video game bad guy, to the realization that he has like personal motivations that you can understand in some way. I think that when whether they debated whether Vader was telling the truth, the idea, if you accepted like, oh, he's actually Luke's father, he wants to overthrow the Emperor to be with his son. It's got a villainous megalomaniac kind of feel to it, but it also comes from a place of like understanding or relatability, and that's where I feel like really was the chief achievement of this film, is they took a character who's literally just been this purple guy in the background waving his fist and made him somebody who I think legitimately was almost as fascinating, if not more fascinating, than everyone else on screen that we've spent all this time with. And I don't know. I think they like blew the villain problem kind of out of the water. If you feel like if you subscribe to that idea that the MCU has a villain problem, all the other things that were mentioned, I think I would agree with. But yeah, that was really what struck me, was the presence, the writing, the performance of Thanos.
I agree with what everyone said, and I think the biggest takeaway for me, because I did have this strange, kind of like when we have seen Annihilation, and we talked about that previously on a panel, this weight afterwards that I couldn't describe, that I needed to sit with for a bit. And thinking about it, I really think that the Russos and McFeely and Marcus really need to be credited, not only for building this amazing cinematic universe, but I think if we use Civil War as an analogy for perhaps a commentary on American political culture after 9/11, I think that this movie is an analogy for political culture and our fractured society in the post-Trump era, or the current Trump era. I really think that Thanos has come to represent the conservative, lower and middle class America view towards what needs to be done for our society. versus the liberal approach to helping everyone without hurting other people and without being blindsided to others' impact and the repercussions of doing things from a more conservative approach. And I think that has come to represent the Avengers. So, and I think that, and I get very emotional when I talk about it, I think that there are deeper levels that we could discuss when it comes to the political analogies. I think that the idea of entitlement when it comes to Thanos and his impact on the rest of the universe, literally. I think that I think there's a lot to talk about, and I think there's also a lot to talk about in an analogy with the relationship of Thanos and Gamora, which had a huge and significant impact on me, and I'm sure on many other viewers. So I think that there's a lot to talk about, but that was my general reaction to the film. But I do want to dive in deeper for everybody and not compromise the entire conversation. So
I think you've taken up the least time of all.
Yeah, seriously. And yet somehow brought up all of the most important things
Right,
that we're going to jump into next. So, well, yeah.
Well, I do want to get everyone's sense of, were there, and I know, again, I think we can all recognize that this is half of a story, so we can't in any way only epitomize this into one single story, but were there inherent values or themes either that you felt were carried over from the other films within the MCU, or do you think that there was anything new being tackled by the creators in this film? And Justin, we'll start with you.
This film was very much about relationships between people and the consequences of losing those people. Mm-hmm. Whether it comes to threatening the relationship or actually having lost them. I mean, Thor comes on screen having lost virtually everyone he loves. Mm-hmm. Iron Man has Pepper, but that relationship has been weakened over time over the course of the MCU. I mean, the person that they take great pains to establish as him caring about, I think, is Peter Parker. Mm-hmm. You know, they talk about him wanting to be a dad, and clearly he has a father, big brother sort of relationship with Peter. And that relationship, you know, and we lose Peter at the end. Vision and Scarlet Witch are established, and I'm glad that they kind of laid that groundwork in Civil War so that it felt believable to me here. Mm-hmm. But then again, I grew up with Vision and Scarlet Witch being a couple, so it was easy for me. And that pays off, you know, remarkably well at the end. The relationships between Gamora and Thanos and Gamora and Nebula pay off in a very real way. We touch on Star-Lord and the losses he's already suffered, and the loss he doesn't want to suffer with Gamora. And, you know, I mean, he has that incredibly believable, I'm going to screw up the plan moment, you know, that I bought completely, you know, and I mean, and it was grounded in character, but I mean, all of these characters, you know, Okoye and Black Panther, you know, and her relationship with him, and, you know, how because all the relationships are different, you know, there's lovers, there's parents and children, there's siblings, there's just deep friendships, and I think that's a big part of the reason why Captain America's arc, he doesn't have an arc in this movie, you know, because the only person he had to lose was Bucky. But they've already kind of gotten there. You know, I mean,
he's sort of maintaining where he is.
Right. Captain America's arc begins at the end of this movie. Mm-hmm. I think that's going to pay off in the next movie. Right. He lost, you know.
Well, and I would argue, too, to your point about people losing people, I think there are tremendous losses still among the Avengers from Civil War. I think that we feel very palpably how much Iron Man misses Cap. He's lost him. He hasn't lost him physically, but he's lost that relationship. And I think you can just feel that he wants to reconnect. They're in that headspace, and I think it's probably mutual, where you know, you just have characters who relied on each other previously and are separate now. So, you know, that I think will weigh heavily in this the second movie.
What they did really cool as a storytelling device there is by having Bruce Banner Return to Earth, and you really kind of forget that he's missed so much. He missed Civil War, and that he's like catching up. And it was a great way to very organically like remind the audience, like, hey, these things happen.
Like, wait, what's going on? Yeah, it was brilliant.
But you also make me think about the fact, because from Cap's end, Cap has already sort of made his amends to Tony. He's like, look, I screwed you over. I'm sorry.
If you need me, I'll be there.
I'm there, and so I'm going to give you the space you need.
Yeah.
And Iron Man still apparently needs space. And he feels guilty about needing space. I mean, you kind of read that in there. And in losing Cap, he also loses a connection to his father.
Yeah, a big
which
one.
was made very palpable in Civil War.
Well, they almost have like a weird parallel relationship to Gamora and Nebula, because, I mean, Tony really looks at Cap as the favored son, the son that his father wanted.
Yeah, that's some powerful stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think honestly that resonates through a lot of it for me. It is relationships, but I found what was really interesting is like the way that they intend with comic book events, and that doesn't always pan off. This movie did serve as a climax for several storylines. Most noticeably, I would say, as Claire was saying at one point, Guardians of the Galaxy, which I was talking to Barbara about this recently. James Gunn came out and sort of talked about how these movies for him were very much about a group of individuals dealing with childhood trauma and healing together and moving forward. And specifically, I know people are sort of, hit or miss on Guardians of the Galaxy 2. For me, it really connected because there was a lot of exploration of toxic fatherhood, both through the sisters and through Peter Quill. And I never would have expected it to continue as far into this film as well. It was such a huge component. And to see that sort of play, I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but toxic fatherhood not only is a big part in so many characters in this film, but just as in general in the MCU, there seems to be I don't know if it's intentional, but a reason to explore this.
Well, let's dive into that, because it does make me think of the, not that it's a fully connected universe, but if we think about the Disney animated films, a lot of times those animated films were about missing or absentee mothers. And so do you think that there is an intentional theme of toxic masculinity or toxic fatherhood more specifically in these movies? Do you think that that's something intentional? Do you think it comes more from the source material and it just happens to be more cohesive in this cinematic universe?
I'm not sure I can take it to a toxic masculinity level for all of the instances of it. When you look at T'Challa and his father, that is,
it's more of a flawed
same kind of father, same father-son issues going on there, but that's a natural part of the
it's
child.
Not ego.
Well, yeah, exactly. But that's more of a natural part of a child growing up and realizing that their parent was just a person like them and had many flaws and made many mistakes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think in the comic book universe, in the superhero world, where you're so frequently turning those father figures also into the villains, that flawed relationship gets, spun up into something hyper villainous that can mimic toxic masculinity in a lot of ways, and there's certainly absolutely instances of that across. But I don't think that that's Tony and Howard Stark's issue.
Do you think it's perhaps more representative of the idea that, and maybe this is geared towards the younger generation, and recognizing, like T'Chaka and T'Challa, that you have to be better than your parents. You have to do things differently than them. The same with in Thor Ragnarok with Odin and Thor, that you have to do things differently, that there were mistakes made that you have to learn how to improve upon. Do you think that perhaps that is more of the intention?
I wonder if that is it. I don't even know if it's the intention, but I wonder if maybe they're tapping into something where they're telling stories about leaving the earlier generation behind, advancing forward, and naturally, because of the world that we're living in and because of maybe where we're heading, the powerful figures that they choose to represent, in the past powerful figures tend to be these male, sometimes toxic characters. I mean, whether you're looking at, I think they try to integrate things like whether you're looking at like Shield in the first Captain America film, where you do have characters like Agent Carter, but who are the like powerful figures? They're like male senators, male scientists, male playboys, and it seems like when you go to some of these places, like with the mythology, like Thor and even just Guardians of the Galaxy, it seems like those are things that are tapping into as well. They are bringing in powerful female characters, to be our heroes as well. But it does seem to be a lot of almost male gatekeepers, if you want to call them that, or powerful figures of the past.
I don't know if it's intentional, but I feel like there is a real sort of evolution between the missing mother in Disney films and the flawed father in the Marvel films. And I think it has a lot to do with people and who we are. I would not be shocked to find out that a lot of these writers and directors have massive daddy issues.
Sure.
Certainly, I have massive daddy issues, and I'm a writer, and they play themselves out in my writing, a lot. I think a lot of this boils down to the child-parent relationships. Mothers are nurturing. It's a truism. Obviously, it's not universally true, but it is by and large true. By and large, women carry children to term, and they feel a closeness that maybe fathers don't feel. And a lot of children, as a result, crave something from their fathers that they don't always get. I don't think a filmmaker has to sell a mother's relationship to a child. If I say that's his mom, when Iron Man says you killed my mom, nobody thinks, why can't he forgive the Winter Soldier? Whatever thinks that. They're like, I kick his ass. It's really, it's built in there. Sure. With fathers, it's a lot more complicated. Even my dad was a deeply flawed father, and was, even though we lived in the same house, he was still largely absentee. My dad was a heart surgeon, and he was spent and he was a young father. So I was a little kid while he was spending he spent an entire week in the hospital, did not come home.
Wow.
Because he was working, and he slept on his couch, and it was insane. And he didn't have the time to be, the super involved, help you with your homework, let me show you how to do this, dad, and couple that with the fact that he was, incredibly intelligent, incredibly demanding, we had a weird relationship. My mom, our relationship is complicated, but it's also, it's way more unconditional. Do you know what I'm saying? It's way more. So I think for young people, for kids, you look at those Disney movies, having a missing mom is incredibly traumatic, and it's automatically something for a character to overcome. Yeah, the mom is not there. For a slightly older demographic, that preteen, right around puberty kids, where boy, my dad, right? Why can't my dad just fill in the blank? I think when I first read the notes going into this podcast about, bad dads, and I was like, really? And I hadn't really connected to that. And I think, frankly, I didn't connect to it because I was too deep into it. Do you know what I mean? But there's definitely a real, every dad in the Marvel universe in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is problematic at best.
Well, and I think it's interesting that we get an opportunity with Thanos to see that play out with Gamora, who is a girl. And I think there are some different issues there that surround that. And, I was sitting there while we've been discussing this topic and thinking about, one of my other favorite villains in the MCU in recent movies is Hela. And you see a lot of the same behavior and I think there are a lot of parallels, or could have been parallels, that you could explore with Hela showing up on a world, killing off many of the people, but taking someone under her wing at the same time who is arguably part of that world, and trying to, that's kind of that narcissistic, megalomaniac, I'm going to take over everything kind of behavior, is this assumption that Thanos obviously has as well, that you can take someone who's innocent and naive and whatever and take them under your wing, and that it's a very personal form of enacting out that power. And I think it is very much helps you understand the Me Too movement. It is the definition of that power play of emotional co-opting that happens, whether it's sexual harassment, blah, 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 all of that down the road. And I think it's interesting to see it play out with different, fathers and their sons, and a father figure and his daughter figure, and a woman and a man. It's all that same power play. It's
really interesting. Specifically, I feel like when you were looking at the parental relationship between, I do think there are connections with Odin and is it Hela?
Hela.
She's hella fine.
She's hella
Sorry.
But what is interesting is she's repeating somewhat a toxic parenthood cycle by taking under another person on her wing. And while you were saying that, what sort of keyed into me is that for both of those characters, and Thanos specifically, I think in this film, there is this idea of, I know what's right, people won't accept it, those idiots, look what's going to happen. And taking a small child and teaching them, like, your ideology is a very easy way to essentially, like, have someone there that says, "Oh, you're right, you're right."
I agree. That's
so
exactly what my thoughts were.
Yeah,
it's so narcissistic. Yeah,
it's
exactly
incredibly, and then that is doubled by or compounded by the fact that that Thanos' love can only reach to a certain point. Like, Gamora doesn't even think that Thanos loves her. When she realizes that he does, his love only extends to the fact that, well, I can acknowledge that I love you, but it also has to do with the fact that I have to throw what I love off this cliff. And
is it just love in terms of, I love this thing that validates me, or
right?
I have a hard time believing that it is an actual, oh, I love you and recognize.
No, I would
you as
agree. It's a stunted love that he acknowledges, but I don't even know that Gamora would qualify it as love.
But you know who would? Nebula.
Sure.
Nebula saw it. Nebula knew it. Nebula. It's clear.
She saw the
very
favoritism.
That Nebula knew very clearly that Gamora was Thanos' favorite child.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say also, just for that scene, I mean, we can just mention this, but wow, was I blown away by the Red Skull cameo.
Oh, yeah.
That was like,
hands down the most surprising thing in the movie.
I was just blown away by the fact that I recognized him before my husband did in the theater. I was like, oh, yeah.
Well, the other thing, I don't know if everyone knows this, but it's not Hugo Weaving.
I knew it immediately. As soon as he started speaking, I was like, that's not Hugo Weaving.
It's a guy from The Walking Dead who you might have seen. He does impressions of all these celebrities.
Now, I did not know it was him. Ross Marquand, I think is his
name.
Mm-hmm. I thought who he really sounded like to me, I was convinced, and I don't know the actor's name, but the guy who plays Littlefinger on Game of Thrones, he sounded so much like him to me.
That would have been
I was like, oh, it's Littlefinger, it's Peter Baelish, let's go, It wasn't, but
And while we're mentioning Game of Thrones, Peter Dinklage was amazing too. I thought it was such a fun.
I could not get around that moment. It was so happy for me.
It was so brilliant because dwarves are super large in Norse mythology. They are.
Oh, are they? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, if you look, certainly Marvel's portrayed them that way.
Mm-hmm.
If you look back at the old Walt Simonson issues in the 80s, when they have to forge another hammer, when they have to forge Stormbreaker, and they get the dwarves, and the dwarves are these ginormous, gnarly people,
I was so satisfied by Peter Dinklage getting to play a giant, but yet not changing who he was. He was still Peter Dinklage, right? Like, he was still physically himself.
And that scene, for me, just was one of many that represented how, expansive and cosmic and epic this whole, journey and movie felt. Just that, I remember just being in awe with the idea of, here is the star and the forge and the way that it operates to build these weapons of power, and this just like amazing comic book like moment where Thor holds open the barrier that, you know, the star's power burns through.
Stellar energy is flowing.
Oh my god.
We went
So
there.
comic booky. I loved it.
Yeah, we went there, and I kind of in my head there are these moments in the movie where I thought, oh, I hope this is not a moment where it gets boring and I'm like dull. You know,
Sure,
it's dull.
yeah. Mhm.
And aside from the fact that I was overwhelmingly giddy at seeing Peter Dinklage show up, and that he was there in person and not because the rumor was that he was going to be one
CG.
of the children of Thanos, and it would be more of a voice kind of thing. And I'm like, I was so glad to see him there. But there again, and I think that's why this movie works for me, is we would go to all of these different places that could turn out to be just throwaway, put it on the editing room floor, why did we spend so much time there kind of moments. And Thor and Rabbit, I'm sorry, and Rabbit and Groot, and now and I can't remember Peter Dinklage's character name.
Yetri.
But their story in that place was so emotionally satisfying. Even there, that it's a side moment, and you could like that would have been the pivotal climactic moment in a different Thor movie, you know?
Yeah, seriously.
And it just was so satisfying.
And to have that weapon, and then showing up with that weapon, and then almost ending Thanos' life with that weapon. I mean, there's so much of that was...
My wife was muttering during that fight as Thanos is, kicking everybody. She's like, "Where's Thor? Where's Thor? Where's Thor?"
God.
And he shows up. She's like, "Finally!"
I saw the movie in a private screening up in Valencia for a group called was
it Thor screening?
No, Fandom Social, and so it's a lot of the like comic book store crowd in Valencia buys these tickets, and we all go watch movies in the theater together, and it's kind of fun. And there were probably a couple dozen people there that I knew. The moment when Thor shows up at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, which is what I'm calling that final battle, because that's how satisfied I was with that battle scene.
Okay.
I'm so happy it was like the end of the movie and not some like little scene at the beginning. When he shows up in that moment, and granted, this is probably a very easy crowd, but the entire theater.
No, that's an epic moment.
Cheered.
I would agree.
Yeah, it was so well.
And then when he
out.
does the slam, you're just like totally on board.
My theater, and I was at regular Universal AMC.
Yeah.
There's
Normal
nothing
people.
wrong with that theater.
No, I like the theater, but but it's a regular crowd. It's not a specific. It's not a tailored crowd,
right?
Yeah.
And they cheered also in that moment.
Oh yeah.
Cap showing up that moment, etc. When we come back, can I bring up another theme that I'm not sure that I...
We're done with themes.
I know we want to take a break shortly, but in the back of my head, since seeing the movie, and I'm not sure that I can articulate it well or that I'm really thinking about it correctly, but the fact that Iron Man especially says over and over and over again, and it's part of his interaction with Doctor Strange, that he's not willing to let any individual be left behind, right? In this, it's that the needs of the one are greater than the many, blah, blah, blah moment, and how that ties back into what he's learned from Civil War, perhaps, etc., etc. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on that, but I've been needing someone else to have thoughts on that.
I think we have some thoughts on that.
We have some thoughts.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are going to take a brief break. This may be an extra long panel discussion.
It's an extra long movie.
There's a
gonna go
lot
with
to talk
it.
about. There's a
There
lot
is.
to unpack with this movie. This is a special edition of Fanbase Weekly.
It is indeed. We're going to take a brief break. We'll be back after this message.
Hey listeners, this is Bryant Dillon from Fanbase Press, and I'm here to let you know that Fanbase Press is excited to announce the newest addition to our publishing slate with The Margins, an original creator-owned graphic novel co-written by David Ocampo of DC Comics' 2017 New Talent Showcase and Paul Montgomery of Wormwood, a serialized mystery, as well as illustrated by Amanda Donahue. Examining creativity's dual nature and providing a healthy outlet for self-expression, as well as a mechanism for avoidance, this graphic novel explores the excitement of an artist unlocking their imagination and the dire consequences of getting lost in the margins. Artist Charlie Keogh's new gig begins as a fun challenge to breathe new life into the forgotten pulp world of Alad, this time as a comic book. But as tendrils of this lost realm creep into her sleepy Portland neighborhood, Charlie realizes that Alad is much more than the lines on a day-dreamt map, more than the sum of an old hack's prose. Alad has its hooks in Charlie, and what was once fantasy has become deadly reality for both the artist and the woman she loves. The Margins is currently available for pre-order through the Fanbase Press website, and the graphic novel will be released for sale on July 23rd, 2018. Pre-orders made by June 1st, 2018 will receive an exclusive sketch by Amanda Donahue, as well as a digital Tales from the Margins companion story by David Acampo, and a bookplate signed by the entire creative team. Help support the giveaways, podcasts, and other free content we provide every day here at Fanbase Press by pre-ordering a copy of The Margins, or purchasing one of our other awesome graphic novels at the Fanbase Press online store today.
Welcome back to this special edition of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. This is a Fanbase Feature panel discussion, an extra long one at that, regarding Avengers Infinity War. We have many points that we're going to discuss in this second half. The first one, we're going to dive into some philosophy for a few minutes, because this story certainly brings up an interesting point about Malthusian theory. So we're going to talk about what this is, why it's important.
Old Malthusian theory.
Mr. Malthus, we're going to talk about him. So, I'm going to back up a little bit here. So, both Malthusianism and Neo-Malthusianism seem to apply to Thanos and his philosophical view regarding what is best for the universe as a whole. So, allow me to explain. Per Wikipedia, Malthusianism is the idea that population growth is potentially exponential, while the growth of food supply is linear. It derives from the political and economic thought of the Reverend Thomas Robert Malthus, as laid out in his 1798 writings. He believed that there were two types of checks that in all times and places kept population growth in line with the growth of the food supply. Preventative checks, such as moral restraints like abstinence, delayed marriage until finances became balanced, and restricting marriage against persons suffering poverty or perceived as defective, and positive checks, which lead to premature death, disease, starvation, etc.
Those are all positive.
Those are definitely positive. And this is resulting in what is called a Malthusian catastrophe. The catastrophe would return population to a lower, more quote-unquote sustainable level. Neo-Malthusianism is the advocacy of population control programs to ensure resources for current and future populations. So what do you make of Thanos' connection to either Malthusianism or Neo-Malthusianism? What do you feel Thanos' mission revealed about him, or the themes explored in this film? And what connections do Thanos and his desire to wipe out half of all life have to do with our own world and reality?
Learning about Malthusianism coincidentally comes at a time right after I've just listened to a very interesting piece about the eugenics programs that come about a century after this.
They're often connected to Malthusian,
which, clearly have to be connected to that, and the forced sterilization of undesirable people who were basically kept in concentration camps of a sort. They were called colonies, but were basically institutions where undesirable people, which could be anybody from, mentally deficient, people who were deemed to be mentally deficient, or people who were given the title of being mentally deficient because, they had premarital sex or, sex outside of marriage and were pregnant. Those kinds of things. That's just a really horrific aspect to all of this. But I'm also was reading a book lately called The Sixth Extinction, which posits that we are really at the start of a sixth major, mass extinction event. Because if you start to look at the average numbers of species that go extinct, we're in a period now where we're exceeding that by a factor of 10,000. So we may already be in one of these positive checks.
Fantastic.
A little bit.
Very positive.
Sorry.
It's interesting. What makes me think is about something that I don't remember if we talked about this on during the recording or in between or during the break, but it returns me to the subject we were talking about where there's so much effort and so much certainty in this character, and I would imagine individuals who believe in this kind of philosophy, Malthusian or neo-Malthusian, there's so much effort put into this certainty of like, this is the way to handle it. And when you look, especially with the presence of the Infinity Gauntlet, which can literally accomplish anything, there is a huge blindside to this character, and this forethought of like, if you put, it's easily arguable that if you put the same effort into trying to make scientific advancements or come up with other ways to feed the population or increase resources, that if you put the same effort you're putting into like trying to restrict people or control the population or do these horrific things that you feel are necessary, you could accomplish the same goal without so much pain and suffering. Even if you were doing it as Thanos seems to indicate, like, this is the most humane way I can think is to just flick people out of existence,
And he's positing it in a way where he's not doing the evil thing by selecting the people because
it's like an equal footing. Like, I honestly, the one thing that I would be interested to see is, like, does Thanos know that he's not going to be one that fades out, and does that matter to, like, would it matter to him? Is he selfless in his own mind that he'd be like, hey, if I disappear, that's part of it?
Did he have family prior to appropriate Gamora?
I don't know. I think all his family's dead, right? I mean, because his entire
Red Skull refers to him as Thanos' son of, and I didn't make up the name. And I forget his father's name in the actual comics because Thanos is an Eternal. And, I mean, he had a brother. He has a family in the comics.
Yeah, so that's part of the gap for me with Thanos is trying to figure out how he fits into this Titan, his home world, and what's the rest of this population? Are they all Eternals? Was he kind of a god figure in this population?
I feel like, I mean, they've really changed Thanos, his backstory and who he is. In the comics, Thanos is an Eternal from Titan, but Titan, Saturn's moon, not Titan, a separate planet. And
he has a different goal behind doing this, right?
Oh yeah, in the comics, he is literally, and they actually kind of allude to this in the original Avengers film.
Right. Mm-hmm.
He is literally trying to woo the incarnation of death.
Right.
He is in love with her.
Which, I mean, my husband was convinced that meant we were going to get Kate Blanchett back and Hela because that
was
would
a popular
be who
theory.
he's trying to.
Interesting.
I mean, personifying ideas is hard to pull off. I think in live action and make it work. But I mean, and that's all built into the character. I mean, Thanos literally is Greek for death. I mean and his brother's name was Eros, and it was a guy who could woo people. And he may never appear again in this post-Me Too movement, actually.
Well, I think that Brian and Justin, I think that you, and Claire as well, of course, but I think that there are things that each of you said that really struck me that I do think, returning to the idea of entitlement, that, Bryant, I don't think the idea ever occurred to Thanos that with this destruction of half of the world or the universe's population, that would affect him in any way. And I think that idea of not having to deal with the repercussions of his actions separates himself and kind of protects himself from these things.
And would you believe when we have that final shot, do you think that where he's sitting sort of content is, from at least I guess from my interpretation, my belief is clearly there is an undercurrent or maybe a subtext of like he's going to sit here and he's happy now, but the weight of Gamora's death is going to weigh and weigh and weigh on him. Do you feel like
it very well could, and I think that it will, and I think that that's what will lead us into partly the second half of this story. Mm-hmm. However, I think that him sitting in isolation alone without having to see any of the repercussions about this is one of the most important things. That this is why he can do this. This is
he
why
still feels completely certain and justified, and like I'm the hero of the story.
Assuming where he is, that he's alone, which I'm not so sure is the case.
In a lot of ways, and I think it goes back to, again, the political culture and analogy. If you look at Thanos in the same way of the scene from Ebenezer Scrooge, when the donation collectors come to his place of business and he asks them, are there no poorhouses? Are there no, for him, that's fine. This is the way it should be, because that will be the ends justifying the means. That there are places for these people, and that's, it justifies it. I think it's kind of the same that for Thanos, this is justified. Like, this is how it has
there's
to
a
be.
harshness, but he's accepted it, and he now... I think it is like there's a weird complexity to it, because I think you are right that there's this message of like everyone else is suffering and like going, oh my God, what just happened? And he's kind of just like sitting contentedly and like sure of himself. But there is also that undercurrent of like, you feel like you saw the pain of Gamora's death. It's weird. I don't know which way it's going to go, because there's part of me that goes, I do think that there's going to open this weakness in him. And there's another part of me goes, even if he does, he'll never admit it. He'll always be like, I did what was right.
We want people who sit in positions of privilege and who operate thinking that they're egalitarian and benefiting humanity, but other people can see the hypocrisy of their position of privilege, essentially. And that's, I think, something that in our current political scenario, we live in a constant state of stress and tension about wanting those people to realize what they're doing. And the real answer to that in many times is, oh no, they understand what they're doing. They understand their place of privilege. They accept it. They revel in it. And that's wildly disappointing.
Well, let's transition to one other point in the film before a number of the Avengers start to fade away. Justin.
Let me just say one thing.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Just almost an aside.
Yeah.
Talking about Malthus, and it just...
his name just makes it sound bad to begin with.
Well,
just gonna throw that out there.
So, back in the day, in DC Comics, they established a planet, Malthus, or Malthus, which was overpopulated. And
no way.
The people of Malthus evolved to become the ones who survived, to become the Guardians of the Universe, and move to the planet Oa.
Those are the people from
the blue people who power the Guardians of the Universe.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Also, but that's why they were exclusively male. It was only males who became the Guardians of the Universe. The females became a race called the Zamarons, who eventually created the Star Sapphire.
Did they change this for the films? Because they
yes,
female
they
Guardian?
changed this for the films.
Okay,
yes.
right, yeah.
And eventually there are female Guardians.
Okay.
The Guardians create female versions of themselves to sort of... but they dealt with these very things in DC Comics like in the 80s.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I have a few of those old Green Lantern comics from the 80s in my collection somewhere. And I was sitting here thinking, man, I know.
Sounds familiar.
So I just double checked it on Wiki real quick. And I wanted to say also about Thanos really quick, just because Brian had mentioned, would he accept his own death? But I think he does separate. He elevates himself philosophically above them. He's the one who's willing to make that hard choice. And obviously the universe needs someone willing to make that hard choice.
Again, I say the word narcissism.
So I don't think the idea of him dying ever crosses his mind. I'm quite sure that he, if only subconsciously, edits himself out of the half. I think it's half the universe plus one. That's left.
Yeah.
Him being the plus one.
Well, I think that transitioned us well if we think about going to the moment perhaps immediately after the snap. We go back to the plane of existence where Thanos was when he woke up with the Soul Stone. And we see him return and see young Gamora again. So I'm curious what everyone's thoughts were on the purpose or meaning of that scene.
Do we get to talk about the theory now?
And you can speak about your theory. Yes, absolutely.
Well, it's probably very important to include, like, the words that are shared there, right? Is that Gamora asks him what was the price of completing his mission, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What did it cost?
What did it cost? Yeah.
Justin, what are your thoughts? We'll start with you.
I believe this plays into what I literally just said off mic. Thanos will not be satisfied with what he's done. Mm-hmm. I think that, him continuing to live after killing half the universe, he's got no goal, he's got no one to love him. The person he was trying to raise to, accept his ways is gone.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it's interesting that some semblance of her is still alive in the Soul Stone. Mm-hmm. I suppose it's not surprising given that it's the Soul Stone. But in the comics, Thanos was undone by his own dissatisfaction, and I think that Gamora's existence in the Soul Stone is a precursor to that dissatisfaction and maybe him undoing himself. But in the comics, the Avengers weren't left alive either, so it's...
Well, also there's the thing that, like, the one confusing thing that, and maybe this plays into your theory, Claire, but...
it's not my theory, but...
Or
anyway,
the theory that you will share.
Yeah.
The theory known as Claire's.
I don't want to be given responsibility for this in any way.
This is Claire's theory.
Claire Thorne. She lives in California. I don't know what to make necessarily of the fact that the gauntlet seems destroyed as well, and what the gauntlet is broke. At least that seems to be an indication. The Soul Stones still seem, or the Infinity Stones still seem intact. I don't know if whether Thanos will hold on to these. Will he destroy them?
Yeah, his ability to wield them. Then
I would assume because at least not the same way. Because the gauntlet clearly allowed some things to happen, but when people have the stones, they can influence, reality in certain ways. So
I feel like I have to go back and listen to Peter Dinklage again, talk about
what went around
with the gauntlet, perhaps. But anyway, what I read online, at least one of the things that I read online that really seemed to make sense, and especially in trying to track back to what Doctor Strange, what he understood, and I don't know that it's a plan that Doctor Strange had, or that he just went. Obviously, he went and looked at 14 million possibilities,
right, yeah.
And we are in theory now on the track of the one possibility that leads to Thanos' defeat,
right?
Which seems to me to be a scenario in which Thanos believes he had done what he's done, or that he has succeeded, and I think it's on paper in a way. And that all of these people who were dusted, and because we then go and we see Thanos, the gauntlet is destroyed. So I think to a certain degree that infinite power that he had is no longer infinite. So I think Thanos must be in a place now where he is defeatable, because they were trying to get the gauntlet off of him. Obviously, that's not going to work. But what this theory posits is that at the end of the movie we see him go see Gamora at the Soul Plane, but that the theory is that they are in the Soul Stone, and that he is there, and that in many other stories involving the Soul Stone, the Soul Gem, whatever it's called, that people who die are taken into the Soul Stone gem. So but the theory then would be that all of these people who were dusted, and I don't know that it's true for anybody else who died prior to that. I wouldn't think so. I think Gamora's interaction with Thanos is getting the Soul Stone.
She unlocks the Soul Stone.
Maybe she's the key to that. Yeah. Like she has some sort of involvement in helping save those people, pull those people's souls into the Soul Stone. So it's interesting thinking that we may have two different planes of existence with the people who are with Gamora in the Soul Stone, and Thanos there potentially as well, and those people then battling him in one place and then coming back to another place. And
there is precedent in the comics for that theory. And
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain Gamora had died before the Infinity Gauntlet story and was brought back out of the Soul Stone, as was Adam Warlock.
there are instances of people who are brought back to life then. So I think we'll get some of those people back, but maybe not all of them. Right? I don't know.
Do you and I would ask this specifically to Justin, but anyone can jump in. Do you think that they're going to... I mean, we have the hint of Adam Warlock at the end of Guardians 2.
Right.
And the Mind Stone is essentially outside the gauntlet at this point, now that the gauntlet is broke. Do you think that Adam Warrock might... Or Warlock. Do you think Adam Warlock will... I was assuming he's going to be in Guardians 3, but do you think we'll see him in Infinity War 2, that he could be created in the way that Vision was in Avengers 2?
There are a lot of comic book events that could grow from some of the seeds of what was planted in this movie. Certainly, Adam Warlock's role in comics has largely been opposing Thanos, specifically in matters involving the Infinity Stones. But not exclusively. He also dealt with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So, my feeling is that Adam Warlock will not play a role in what you are calling Infinity War 2.
Which will be something else.
But I keep thinking of as Avengers 4 ever.
Do you think that's a legitimate title, potentially?
Do I think it's a legitimate title? Someone kind of threw some of this stuff at me, and I feel very confident there's going to be a time travel element involved in the next
sounds
film.
Very exciting.
And Avengers Forever is a big time traveling, sprawling adventure, and I feel like because they were originally titled Infinity War 1 and 2, and then they changed that.
Yeah, and they said the second one was spoilery.
Yeah, and if they call it Avengers Forever, that is spoilery.
Yes.
And there is... this is not at all approaching what you just asked me, but I'm desperately hoping that they're going to introduce Kang the Conqueror, the Avengers time-traveling villain, and that there will be something interesting, and that they will take this in an unforeseen direction. That's... I feel like all the roots of solving this in an Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War sort of way are there and too easy to see. And I feel like they don't want to be that predictable.
Might we see Franklin Richards?
Who's Franklin Richards?
My belief right now is that the Fox Disney deal is not finalized. Franklin Richards is the son of Reed and Sue Richards from the Fantastic Four. I do not think that those rights will be... They're not available now. I know that. And so they've already finished shooting Avengers 4.
Yeah.
Oh, it is done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They start shooting it 3 weeks after they finish shooting 3.
I gotcha.
So, those productions were done back to back.
And the rumor is that the next phase is what Feige's working really hard on getting all those characters for what would it be, Phase 4?
I guess.
Don't know. But X-Men and Fantastic Four and Deadpool, he's trying to weave them in.
He keeps saying, "Look, I don't have them yet, and so I'm not dealing with them until I do."
Yeah, right.
And so, boy, I would love that if the Fantastic Four was there. I don't really care what happens with the X-Men in the movie rights, but I really care about the Fantastic Four because we've gotten a couple of good X-Men movies. I still have not gotten a good Fantastic Four movie.
And they deserve, I don't know, Fantastic Four just so much deserve to be in with those other heroes. To interact with Spider-Man.
They fit to the MCU in a way that maybe the X-Men don't. You know?
They're like a core
at the moment. Yeah. At the moment, I think Marvel would reinvent them to
sure.
They reinvented Spider-Man so impressively. I don't put anything past them anymore. But I don't think it's going to be Adam Warlock. That's not my.
No, that makes sense. It does feel a little packed.
Yeah.
That's all very interesting. I just learned a lot. I learned so much.
You would make an excellent next wife for me.
I just don't know the comics background, and it's so fascinating to me. And especially like Barbra was wigging out about there's a Malthus planet. Like that's amazing to me. But I just was thinking that if all of these dusted people are in the Soul Stone
Yeah.
with Thanos, then you might still get your Scarlet Witch moment,
Which would be awesome.
right? Because if she evolves or whatever that requires, so that she can fight Thanos one-on-one, in that, I mean, that might be the environment to do that. I don't know all that backstory, but
I think if they're going to do something like that, because the House of M moment, she says no more mutants, and all the mutants, the vast majority of the mutants disappear. It would be interesting if she had a no more Infinity Gems moment.
Ooh.
And that but her powers don't work that way.
Not here.
In the movies. They have not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. She is not reality warping.
Well,
like she has been in the comics.
They not like in the comics, but they are taking. Didn't they take a step in this movie? Wasn't there a moment where her powers? I vaguely remember, but I thought she did something in this movie that was beyond what her powers had been before and was reality warping.
Well, actually, I don't know that they did, at least from my perspective, Justin. I don't know if you feel that she did, but it actually transitions well to a next point. So unless there's anything...
do you remember what you're talking about? Because I don't recall seeing that.
I'm trying to think. I think it was during the first time that they were attacked, but her and Vision. But I would.
That's my least favorite scene in the movie.
It's
which one?
It's in a
When
movie.
they're originally attacked by Thanos' goons, and it bothers me because Vision and Scarlet Witch are so powerful, and then Cap, Falcon, and Black Widow show up and whip these guys, and it just didn't feel.
It felt a little weird.
For the comic book guy in me, I was like that. That seems,
I don't know if I can specifically.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can specifically point out, but I did, for whatever reason, have this feeling, kind of like the Hulk had sort of a progression over a few course of movies of like becoming more in control of his, ability to change and interact with the actual Hulk presence. I feel like there is a slow build where they're trying to. It seems like they eventually want to get Scarlet Witch to a place where she can do that stuff.
I don't think they know what she can do exactly, because she used her powers very differently in Age of Ultron than she has since.
Which is what I actually want to bring up.
In Age of Ultron, she was messing with people's minds.
Exactly.
That's true.
Yeah.
And she hasn't done that since. It's
So-
always been telekinetic stuff.
Yeah. So the reason that I want to bring that up is because for me, there's a very important moment that I think is going to explain the second half of this story between Thanos and Iron Man. This is at the end of their interaction on Titan, when Thanos shares his respect for Tony Stark, and that they have both been burdened with seeing things or having this knowledge or forethought of things to come. And I was so struck by that, of what that means, because for me, the only people who would have known that were Scarlet Witch and those characters that she affected in Age of Ultron. So how would Thanos know this? Is this something that will be revealed in the second half of the story to be that Thanos knows that perhaps Tony Stark is his undoing? What did that have any impact on anyone else?
That didn't impact on me until you just said it. But here's the way it impacted on me.
Okay.
If it's foreshadowing that Tony Stark is going to make the decision that kills off half the Avengers in the end.
Okay.
That's what it makes me think. It makes me think that Tony Stark is going to make a Thanos-like decision and basically like we've got to go. The
It's
old
time
guard
for
is
the
gonna,
new guard.
where the old guard is going to have to be cleared off the board in order to, save the world. And then he'll have to deal with the fact that he's leaving Pepper and a life that he could have behind. That's
It'll trigger a moment of self-sacrifice.
And because they made the point multiple times, we don't trade lives for lives.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
And
That was the one theme that I just keep coming back to.
And heroes do that. That is exactly what heroes do. They trade lives for lives.
Yeah. Well, and that comes back to a self-sacrificing moment. It's the Spock moment, of doing what needs to be done, and see, all of my anxieties about this movie just get pushed forward to the next movie. Anyway.
No, I totally agree with all of that. That seems really interesting.
Can I bring up an observation?
Sure.
And I don't know, maybe people don't agree with me, but I think walking out of this movie, partly because I was really, really set on being very, having to just accept Thanos. I was really worried about Thanos and just having to, get around what I was expecting to be kind of an overacted, cartoonish kind of villain. And that's not what I got at all. I was so amazingly surprised. But I think I just want to call out what I see is yet another benefit of the MCU and this production team taking a decade to create so many main protagonists and give us their stories. This movie felt very unique to me in the sense that it is not a story, really. I mean, if you analyze, I think, the script, it is not a story narrative about any one of the protagonists' arcs. It is Thanos' arc.
Oh, absolutely.
It is his, and how unique and rare to me to be in a place of storytelling in a theater where you have all of this other stuff going on and you don't need to have any story arc for any of the other characters. They're just showing up and doing what you know they need to do, what they're going to do at this place in their stories, and you can devote all of the story to a villain and turn him from what otherwise would have been yet another stomping, I'm here because of reasons and I'm going to, kind of Steppenwolf my way through, a movie. But I'm sorry, I went there. But
it's a fair comparison.
Yeah, but I get to have a moment with Thanos where I kind of feel sorry for him. Like his tears kind of brought tears to my eyes in a way, and it's like, oh, okay.
Well, what's really amazing about that is it reminded me of Game of Thrones in a way where, because like when you look at villains that are like Bucky or Loki or Killmonger, they are almost on the edge where you're like, they're almost like a sympathetic anti-hero more than a villain to a degree. They have some villainous tendencies, but you almost go like they're tragic. The way they've been, created in the world has led them to this. But with Thanos, you're really looking at someone where you're almost always going, I vastly, strongly disagree with your mission, but it doesn't mean that you haven't been able to get me to sympathize with you. And it reminds me of characters in Game of Thrones where I'm like, they're clearly villainous, horrific characters, but they are written well enough that you go, I see how a human being becomes that person.
Right.
I love Cersei Lannister so much.
Oh, I'm a Cersei fan.
Cersei
as well.
and Jaime and Tyrion, the Lannisters are my favorite characters in that show. I love them so much. And all my wife and her, they're all like, "What is wrong with you?"
Absolutely.
And I'm like, Cersei.
I absolutely see Cersei wiping out half the population of Westeros for whatever purpose that she needs.
Right, but the thing that they share, I mean, like you could say that maybe that moment of wiping out the universe for her in that series is blowing up the keep or whatever it's called, the sparrows or the sept, yes,
yeah.
But it is built in a way where it's not like she turns to the camera and like twirls her mustache. Right. You feel like from her perspective, this is 100% justified and makes sense in this way, and she has a certain payback to deliver, and it's not the same motivations, but there is this feeling of like, I don't agree with Thanos' mission, but boy do I feel his emotions as we go through his journey, Well,
and not letting, and I'm not trying to imply that Josh Brolin would have just done this naturally, unchecked, but the directors, I think, made a very, very smart and purposeful decision to keep Thanos very subdued. I mean, when you look at the scenes he's in, he's not waving his arms around or doing anything. He just shows up and kind of stands there, and he'll explain what he's doing, and he just and that's more ominous to me. He doesn't feel the need to...
He has confidence in his righteousness and his strength.
Yeah, which he's purple, so if he'd been posturing...
He does get called Grimace at one point in this movie.
Which was awesome. Really, but Marvel, at least in the latter half of their catalog, has kind of avoided that tendency in their villains, with the exception of Hela. Mm-hmm. Hela was gleefully doing the things she did.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that worked for her.
Really loved what she was doing,
But part of the reason it worked for her is because that movie is so wackadoo. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it fits the whole tone of that movie.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Killmonger, very sympathetic, very easy to see his side of things. Mm-hmm. You have to be reminded that he kills his own girlfriend and that he turns on people and that he jacks up an old lady by the throat. You have to be reminded that he's evil. Yeah. the Vulture, which people always forget, but I think the Vulture is one of the
he was
best
good,
villains that Marvel's had. I mean,
Incredibly sympathetic.
You really feel for him. He's been screwed over by the system. He's just trying to take care of his family, and he's been twisted into this bad guy, but you can see why he was doing the things he was doing. Winter Soldier's very different, I think, but Zemo.
Yeah.
Civil War,
Yeah.
you know.
Another one who wins, too.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. It's, I mean, and you could totally see, because he's not trying to hurt anybody but the Avengers. He's apologetic for everyone else he gets
Which
hurt.
he's going to be the next villain in the next Mission Impossible movie, which we had a trailer for during Avengers Infinity War, and I'm just choosing to believe that he is Zemo.
That could be.
He's gotten out of
You know what's
prison.
interesting out of it?
Daniel Brawl is playing the villain in?
He's one of the villains, I believe.
He's
I think there's
one.
multiple.
Let me tell you,
there's always multiple.
I'm not Tom Cruise's biggest fan by any means, but I like those Mission Impossible movies.
Well,
Well,
I don't know if you've seen, speaking of people from Justice League, Henry Cavill is kicking the crap out of people in that film, and you're like,
that's
wow.
Like the
bathroom scene is...
I'm like, I do not want to get hit by Superman.
But I want you to know, I keep
yelling.
thinking that mustache, now I call it kryptonite.
It's great, yeah. you want to yell at Tom Cruise on the screen like, no, wave him off. It's Superman. Don't do that.
But just to go back to what you were saying about Daniel Bruhl and Zemo. Zemo, to me, like, what's interesting when you say that is Zemo's almost a similar character in the approach that Thanos has, except he has no ego. When that character's lost everything, he doesn't care if he dies. His only goal is to make the Avengers fight to a point where they're going to destroy themselves. And he does complete his mission. I mean, to a degree. At the end, he sees himself as successful, and he doesn't care if he goes to prison or if he dies or whatever. Thanos has, like, that's one of the things that we've been talking about this villain. There's this interesting, like, he seems to indicate to others, like, oh, I'm selfless, I'm like this, but there is clearly this ego of, like, only I could do this. I as we were saying earlier, burdened with great purpose. A line taken from Loki that was delivered as, like, maybe, as we said, a showman as Loki. Thanos believes it, even though I don't think when you examine it outside of his point of view, it's necessarily true. You know,
they also do a good job in this film. I mean, he never says anything like that. And again, he's not the mustache twirly type. Lena Headey would rock a mustache, by the way.
And nothing else.
I'm
just kidding.
But he relishes this fight. I mean, at the very beginning, when he fights the Hulk, they're like, his minions are like, no, let him have his fun. He wants
because he doesn't get to do this very often.
And so it's clear that hurting people and causing pain, these are things that he enjoys.
Is it? Do you think that he enjoys it, or there's almost some part of me that goes like, is this what he's really enjoying? Is less this like need for physical violence and more this fact that he suffered this wrong in his mind, where he knew what was right and had to watch. Like one of his opening lines I've seen is like, "I know what it's like to feel like you're right and still lose. To know you're absolutely right and still lose."
Not in the movie. I don't think.
No, it's in that
trailer.
It's in that Thor. It's the opening. Like it's one of the first things he says to Thor as he's dragging him across the floor.
Okay, because I felt like that was missing.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of noise in the theater.
No, we missed half the lines too. But no, I remember specifically. It's one of the first things he says to Thor in that opening scene, and I almost wonder if he's less of a guy who just likes to beat people with his fists, or if he's someone who's relishing like. Finally, everyone's gonna get that I was right. All you idiots said I was wrong, and I'm getting this satisfaction out of proving like I'm doing what's necessary. I'm right. I'm this, merciful figure.
Boy, a year is a long time to wait. A year is a long time to wait.
Can I come back to villains
of
again
course.
in the movie and just how outrageously satisfied I was with Thanos, number one, but then we get the children of Thanos, and they weren't
Ebony Maw.
They weren't all.
Is it the Dark Order or the Black Order?
It's the Black Order.
Is it not or the Black Circle? Maybe I don't know.
Black Circle, I believe, is Angel.
Yeah, that guy.
I've never seen Angel, so.
Black Order.
There's probably a lot of
it's
black
the Black Order.
circles and orders, and there's multiple ones. But I can't remember all of them. Like, I don't think they're all that memorable to me.
I don't know their names.
But Ma...
Ebony Ma stuck with me.
Ebony Ma, and then...
Corvus Glaive is apparently his favorite, which I thought was a...
Barb thought he was a Skrull because he had his pointy ears and a little hat.
Yes,
But
he was white, and he had a,
There were several there that kind of seemed like they looked alike, and I think that was just probably a visual problem for me, where they kind of looked just big and orc-like.
Yes.
And so, but Ebony Maw, oh my god! And I'm so bummed that he's gone now, because it would have been so amazing to bring him back and let him just be a Doctor Strange villain in it, because he was fun to watch. I really enjoyed him.
And he was terrifying too.
And I really enjoyed Proxima Midnight, who is Carrie Coon, my girl from The Leftovers, and carried that very, very well.
And also the wife of Corvus Glaive.
Yeah,
I learned that. I did.
But she was, for as minor of a role, to take that role and make her memorable and seem really, really, when she's interacting with Scarlet Witch, and then there's that amazing scene during the Battle of Pelennor, at the end, where, sorry, I just started to think of it, where she and Scarlet Witch and Black Widow and Okoye, face off, and that was
awesome.
Moment and a half. She was just very, out of all of them, of course you don't have Ma at that moment, but she was really the one who felt threatening and like the leader, and
for sure,
boy, she was good. Carrie Coon.
The only thing I didn't like about that, and it always annoys me when we reach this point in the movie. We're like, okay, now we're going to have the chick fight. All the chicks are going to fight each other. And I'm like, no, they're all heroes. They can fight
Just
anybody.
let them fight anybody. Yeah.
That always feels a little... I mean, it's good to have an all-woman moment, I guess, but I always feel like that it always smacks of marginalization to me.
Sure.
Not that I'm accusing the Russos of doing that.
No, but I know exactly what you mean. It feels like token moment. Almost.
Yeah.
Although... I'll take the token sometimes, and it'll still feel really satisfying to me.
Well, we're going to take one more break. We will be back after this message for us to wrap up this Fanbase Feature panel discussion. Hi, this is Barbra Dillon, Editor-in-Chief at Fanbase Press. I'm here to tell you about our latest comic book series, Kinsey. Kinsey is about Lupe, an average, insecure, well-meaning, occasionally cranky teenage girl whose life is completely turned upside down when she discovers she has superpowers at her quinceañera. Her Kinsey powers only last as long as she's 15, so over the course of this roller coaster year, we follow the adventures of Lupe as she figures out what it really means to be a hero. Kinsey was nominated for the 2018 Dwayne McDuffie Award for Diversity and has been described as if Jane the Virgin and Peter Parker had a comic book baby. All 15 issues of Kinsey are collected and available in an English-language trade paperback that is now available through fanbasepress.com or on Comixology. Welcome back to the final portion of this Fanbase Feature panel discussion on Avengers Infinity War. We have a few last questions for our host of panelists. The first one actually comes from an article from Deadspin by author Nick Martin, who recently pointed out, quote, "Part of Civil War and the entirety of Spider-Man Homecoming made very clear how Stark felt about using what is essentially a child soldier in this greater war he's seen in both visions and dreams since he first fell back through the wormhole in 2012. Now, to have Spider-Man die in his arms, pleading with him like the child he is, just hours after he spoke to Pepper about wanting a child of his own, that's it. That's Stark's worst nightmare in the fading flesh. I'm not sure what Avengers 4 holds for him, but expect to see a broken, unhinged Tony Stark hell-bent on saving the universe and not himself," end quote. So, panel, what do you expect from Tony Stark after the events of Infinity War, and what overall story do you think is being told about this character over the last 10 years?
What I find really interesting, and I won't say too much on it, but when we look back at the 10 years of the MCU and obviously how much Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr. is focused as the lead character, if you will, of this. Each time I revisit movies after a new one comes out that sort of takes the story along a little bit, whether it's Avengers: Age of Ultron, whether it's Iron Man 3, Civil War. There's this very interesting story being told about Tony Stark, and I think it's debatable what we each see out of it, but what I find most interesting out of it is he almost had this thing where he is a reverse Batman, is the way I look at it. He's a guy who, in the Iron Man movies, post-Avengers, the first Avengers film, is determined to come up with a solution or a plan for every potential threat. And when he starts doing that, I think specifically in Iron Man 3, he sort of buckles under it. He can't deal with the pressure of constantly trying to think what the next problem is and how is he going to save everyone from it. And that causes him to make, careless, reckless actions in Age of Ultron, careless, reckless actions in Civil War. And he's clearly trying to do the right thing, constantly reevaluating, but kind of tripping his way along. And I don't know exactly what the final story is. I mean, clearly there are elements in here, but I want to hear what all three of you think about, what story are they telling with this character, do you think?
I think my problems with decisions he's made, and this article just hones in on all of the parts of Civil War, particularly Civil War, but I also had those issues in Spider-Man Homecoming, where so much of his interaction is cavalierly, he takes a cavalier approach to what I see as a very monumental parenting role with Peter Parker. And I think for me it's because I see Tony reacting to, out of noble purpose, but still the way he functions as a person is through emotional reactionism, and he has not lassoed his ability to control himself in that fully adult kind of way. And I keep wanting to see, and I think we're on the cusp of that. I think losing Cap in that relationship, in spite of the validity around being upset about Bucky's role in the death of his parents, it's still a very emotionally reactive moment. And I think he's learning the breadth of how complex all of these things are. And I hope that's the story for him going forward, is that he cannot just react in one direction emotionally about things.
Justin?
I think I don't fully agree with what you just said, but I don't disagree with it either. But I think you're rubbing against the edges of what I think. I think that Tony's arc his larger arc is the same as his arc in the first Avengers movie, which is he's learning to take himself out of the equation. Mm-hmm. He's learning to stop being so self-obsessed and it's just so driven by his own ego. I mean, he loves himself. He really can't get enough of himself. Yeah. He really likes who he is. He likes being who he is. And in a heroic way, though, and he wants to solve the world's problems, as you say.
Right.
But he wants to do it his way. He does it on his terms. And he trusts himself too much.
Who does that sound like?
Yeah, it's the same Thanos narcissism.
I know, I mean, it's
right?
Yeah. I want you to know, I was just like, this is how my wife describes me. So
I wasn't implying that.
Who does that sound like? I was like, oh shit, someone else go on.
No, but it is an interesting how similar the approach. They're completely different characters, but there is a similarity in approach to I am the solution to the problem.
Sure.
Right.
And maybe that does speak exactly to what you're saying, that Tony Stark realizing I don't have to be the solution, but I need to help the solution.
Right, and he's got to take himself out of it. I mean, in Homecoming, I think it's less a cavalier attitude than it is he doesn't have an ability to understand how important he's become in Peter's life. Mm-hmm. He doesn't know that Peter... I mean, he knows that Peter lost an uncle, but he doesn't know that Peter lost an uncle. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He doesn't really connect to, because no one became a father figure to Tony Stark after his father was killed. You know what I'm saying? And he doesn't really connect to the fact that he's becoming a father figure to Peter.
Right, and that's not as simple as flipping a switch.
Right.
And
or giving him a suit.
Or giving him a suit, fancy though it is.
Yeah, and then complaining when the person does something you didn't explain that they shouldn't do. You know, that is such a wildly, from the perspective of a parent of a young boy, it was such a wildly problematic example of how to be a good nurturing mentor even.
Right.
it was very troubling. It's interesting because I've been rewatching ER, and I'm right at the point where George Clooney's exited the show, but that's basically the character they wrote for Doug Ross, was that narcissistic, kind of emotionally immature person who believes they're the answer to everything. And if they don't institute the solution that they see as being the solution, that everybody else is wrong all the time. And it came from a deeply noble and intelligent and, and sometimes he was right kind of place. But if you're not willing to sit down and go, you know what, my right answer might not be the right answer today. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
I just think it's about learning to take himself out of the equation, which then also leads back to this idea of maybe he's going to sacrifice himself.
Well, and that ties so thematically well within, like, the transition of, like, the idea of, like, all right, he learns to take himself out of the equation, and also necessary to the forward movement of plot, some of the Avengers have to be taken out of the equation for the new blood to step forward. So, that's exciting.
I'm curious because Captain America has also undergone a very clear arc in these stories. I mean, he is the good soldier in First Avenger, and he is a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who questions everything and tears S.H.I.E.L.D. down.
Yeah.
But it's still Captain America at the end.
Right.
Winter Soldier. And then in Civil War, he is like, my government is wrong, and I'm going to do things my way,
Yeah.
And he's getting more and more that way, you know what I mean? And he didn't have a lot to do in Infinity War, but the stuff he did was so dead on character-wise, He's like, if you come after me, I'm going to fight you. He just straight up says that to Secretary Ross, and he's complete, and he's so confident that he's right. And I'm curious how that's going to, because he's so confident that he's right is exactly what we're saying about Tony Stark right now.
And will that tie, like, is that something that's being ignored by the writers, and they're allowing him to allow this confidence to be unexplored, or is that going to? Do you think that'll be addressed? That they'll have to, multiple Avengers are going to have to kind of go through this path of, like, maybe we all are too confident in what we solely ourselves think is the right way to go.
Well, I don't think Thor has that arc in particular.
Well, he's already sort of gone through that to a degree through his Thor movies, have sort of broke him of his confidence in believing he's always right.
It's interesting to think that maybe confidence, self-confidence is this unifying thing in these Avengers movies. Because Black Widow had an arc like that too, especially in Winter Soldier. She really comes to doubt the person she's been. And, even the person she's been as an Avenger. Right. To change, and, she makes different choices. And that's why she starts off on one side of Civil War and ends up on the other. And,
I think she's, like, learning to have the confidence to not just be the person who shows up. I think her prior work, prior to these movies, is all about her showing up and doing what she's been hired to do and not asking any questions. That's a very easy place for a person of no confidence to be, because you can... at least personal confidence, right? In, like, I'm a good person, I can go have my own agency and go do these things. I think that's what she learns, and what Cap teaches her more than anybody else is that I shouldn't just be a follow along and
believe in
do
yourself,
the things. Yeah. I should have my own.
I should have my own belief, my own agency.
I should have my own movie. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, and I think that for T'Challa, I think that was his big takeaway at the end, especially in going back to our conversation about learning lessons from our parents, that, there is something to be learned from other people, from other perspectives, and that your way is not always the right way, and that there can be compromise for either the greater good or for yourself.
And one character we haven't touched on very much at all in this whole podcast that I think is almost the reverse of that is Bruce Banner. Bruce Banner is someone who struggles with a lack of confidence consistently, and maybe what we're going to see. I mean, clearly, I think the Hulk is scared after being hurt and won't come out.
I feel like there's something darker there. Like, they're playing it for laughs, but man, it's
there is, and I think maybe the next movie will deal with, like, if he is going to ever be the Hulk that this team needs, he has to become confident in the relationship between the dual sides, and maybe that is what he has to come.
Is there a standalone Hulk movie?
There's
in
one.
The works?
Oh no! They have issues because Universal maintains some of the rights, and so he really is only a side player.
Which is sad because they really, I think, have done a lot of work to create a place where you could have a standalone story for Mark Ruffalo and what he's going through and figuring out. That would be
Thematically, he's a tough character, though, to fit tonally in the Marvel universe, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because the Hulk, if you're doing the Hulk justice, you're telling a story about rage.
right.
And
Well,
they've been moving the character away from that, you know?
yeah.
I mean...
And arguably that moment probably came in Thor Ragnarok. Like if you told a whole separate story about, you know, and you put him in a place where he's not destroying half of the earth to do that. Like he's on some alien planet somewhere doing it. That would have made more sense.
Well, and some characters really, as much as I would love, I think any character can have a solo movie, some characters really operate, at least in my opinion, better being paired with other characters. I love seeing the Hulk paired with people. I love, as much as I want a Black Widow movie, I do think she functions really well jumping from movie to movie as like the secondary character. Yeah. I wish that they would realize this with some of the TV universe, because I'm kind of sitting here going like, why is there a season 2 of Luke Cage and a season 2 of Iron Fist instead of a season 2 of Luke Cage and Iron Fist?
Yeah,
you know, like, but
as far as the Hulk goes, I find myself not wanting a solo movie.
Yeah.
I feel like he works great in the Marvel Cinematic Universe the way he's being presented, but if you're telling Hulk stories, they're just... he's a tragic character. He's Frankenstein, you know?
Yes, sure.
It's just, I don't know that it fits quite as well in what they've been doing. You know, I wonder if they would make Hulk movies even if they had the full control of the rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and it'll be interesting to see, you know, we didn't see anything of Hawkeye at all. I would doubt that they're writing him off entirely, so, and I would assume we see Ant-Man, you know, kind of return, and obviously Captain Marvel.
Mm-hmm. Apparently there's like a throwaway line in the movie that I don't know if, I don't think I caught it, but I read about it, where there's someone says that both Ant-Man and Hawkeye made a deal. Yeah.
And they're under house arrest.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll see that in Ant-Man and Wasp, and maybe even Hawkeye will show up.
Yeah, he might
in one of
cameo
those
in that
movies.
movie.
So.
Well, sadly, this is going to have to bring our
This was too
Fanbase
short.
Feature.
I
I'm
don't
so
know.
sorry.
I didn't get much time to
It
talk
wasn't
about
2.5 hours long.
That's true.
We talked for as long as the movie.
Exactly. As we always do at the end of these Fanbase Feature discussions, if folks liked Avengers Infinity War and wanted to find out more or watch other films, TV shows, read comics that brought the same heart to it or just really had the same inspiration behind it, what would you recommend to people? Justin, we'll start with you.
I don't know how much... Well, there's certainly a group interactivity that kind of fits in with what happens in these Marvel movies. And my wife and I just recently watched Netflix's new Lost in Space. Mm-hmm. And that was a tremendously enjoyable show. Not a perfect show. And not necessarily a show for Lost in Space purists.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
It is a from-the-ground-up reboot in the same way that Battlestar Galactica was. Mm-hmm. And it really reimagines the concept of, you know, being a Swiss Family Robinson in space. Mm-hmm. But I found it... I'm not particularly attached to the camp of the original. And I found this... a very satisfying and rewarding show, mm-hmm. and worth your time and effort. And man, it shows that you can do some amazing visual effects on a TV budget. Mm-hmm. I mean, this alien world looked amazing, and it looked real. Yeah. And that's not that easy to do.
Yeah. Claire, what about you?
Well, I'm probably the least able to talk about other properties that like comic books or whatever, but I think you're only on a comic book related podcast. I know, but I'm
publishing stuff through
I learned things today about comic books.
So did I, Claire.
So anyway, but I think for me in the MCU, over and over and over again, I am reminded at how freaking well they do in even casting the minor,
Sure.
quote unquote, minor roles. Like we can go back to Tessa Thompson, who's not in this movie, but in Ragnarok, and recommend watching Annihilation, just out of highlighting, going and seeing what these quote unquote more minor roles these actors are doing. I will again, for the umpteenth time, tell people to go watch The Leftovers so that you can just see how absolutely flipping amazing Carrie Coon is.
You just like stuff where people disappear.
He's so good. Literally,
Infinity
maybe
War,
the dusting.
Leftovers.
See, I thought The
I
Leftovers.
think someone doesn't agree with you.
No, I've never seen it. I just don't like Damon Lindelof's work. Let me rephrase, because I don't want to point fingers at the guy. He and I have such different storytelling sensibilities that I just cannot connect.
And many people do swear by The Leftovers. I feel like you, Justin, but it is strong enough that it shakes me enough to go like, well, maybe I have to check out The Leftovers.
Yeah, it might be my favorite TV series of all time.
Wow.
Period. Just I'm still coming to that conclusion. But
is it potentially connected to Infinity War?
Well, see, here's the thing: is I
know half the people are disappearing.
I have long just in my mind said, okay, The Leftovers is part of the Fringe universe, and I'm just going to make it part of that because of the sci-fi different universes element to it. But I mean, the premise of The Leftovers is that 20% of the population just disappears all of a sudden.
Wouldn't it be hilarious if the Leftovers is just a town in like middle America in the MCU?
During the MCU.
There's just like something happened one day.
Your favorite show of all time.
And they explain it, and it may actually be tied back to that whole Soulstone thing.
They're like suddenly standing there with a green child. They're like, where are we?
Why are the skies always orange?
In any case, Carrie Coon plays a character she is a rarity in this universe where most people just lost one or two, one person, or some people didn't lose anybody. She lost her entire immediate family.
Jeez.
So she...
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, and I'll just talk about one moment her character has to like give you a definition of just how like raw and badass she is in this movie. Her way of dealing with this trauma is to, in first season anyway, is she has the practice of hiring prostitutes to come to her house so that she can dress up in a bulletproof vest, lay a mattress out on the floor, and pay these prostitutes thousands of dollars a time to shoot her in the chest.
Jeez.
So that she can, like, it's her way of self-harming in order to deal with this trauma. And those moments in the show are just... it is the most raw performance you've ever seen. Mm-hmm. So Carrie Coon, and then Letitia Wright. I will point people to her episode in the most recent season of Black Mirror, which is Black Mirror to begin with, but she is amazing in it. So,
Bryant?
Well, I really, again, what we focused on for this movie was how well I thought the portrayal and examination of the villain was. So I'd really recommend other material that does that. Obviously, a go-to would be Breaking Bad is a series to check out if you interested in that kind of material. I really think that both Gangs of New York and There Will Be Blood are really, really interesting examinations of villainous characters that are also made very human and relatable, even though that they're frankly horrible people, both portrayed by Daniel Day-Lewis, who's phenomenal, of course. And then you mentioned...
so my recommendation, there were actually frequent moments throughout this movie that harken back to me to the Godfather series. There were specific shots that I was like, oh, whoa, that really calls upon those movies for me.
Wow.
So I really felt like Thanos was the Michael Corleone, getting that character arc of, again, kind of going back to what Bryant said, understanding how these people's lived experiences led them to a certain path.
Well, and what's interesting, again, about that is sort of relates to our comparison off mic about Last Jedi and Infinity War, both dealing with, similar themes of, like, losing. But there is a specific Godfather reference in that film as well. They're referring to the moment that Rey cuts off the psychic communication with Kylo as sort of her Michael Corleone moment of, like, slowly closing the door on this person that you've had a connection with and signaling, like, no, we're done, you know? So maybe influencing all sorts of things at Disney right now. They're watching The Godfather.
You make me want to say one more other thing
Yes.
to recommend,
Yeah.
just because shows that are great examinations of a villain and sort of sympathetic in a way. My favorite show for 3 years was NBC's Hannibal.
Okay,
so
sure.
good.
It was so astonishingly good. It's Brian Fuller at his Brian Fulleriest.
Yeah.
I mean, really, really,
Nothing wrong
really
with that.
macabre, and really over the top. Like, I can't believe this was a primetime network television show, because it was visually intense, but it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant,
And turning a protagonist into a villain,
yeah,
and it
And-
was so good.
and the idea that someone could take the character of Hannibal Lecter away from Anthony Hopkins and make it their own.
Yeah.
And Mads Mikkelsen absolutely does that in this show, and that's
So
yeah.
dreamy.
If you like
I
a good,
still find him dreamy in spite of Hannibal.
Oh,
he's
boy.
so-
Now you're going to touch that one.
Well, I want to offer my sincere thanks to Justin, Claire, and Bryant. This has been an amazing discussion, so thank you all for joining us for this.
Thank you for having us.
Hopefully you will join us a year from now so that we can talk about Avengers 4.
Oh my god. I have to,
Yes, for
I
sure.
have to go
Avengers
another
forever.
year.
Well, and just because we haven't mentioned it, I know that everyone listening knows they can get all our stuff at fanbasepress.com, the other content we put out. But Justin, tell them about your comic and let them know where they can check it out.
I am the writer of a webcomic, Hunter Black. It's a hard-boiled fantasy. Imagine if Kill Bill were happening in Middle-earth, but looked like Samurai Jack, and you have an idea of what we're doing. You can find us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at hunterblackcomics.com. The whole thing's up there for free. And if you're really nice, I'll sell you a book.
Claire, you want to share anything?
I don't know. Oh, yeah, I do. So you can go to my Etsy store and peruse all of my geeky cross-stitch patterns and kits, of which I have one that's a mashup of Galaxy Quest and the Avengers. So I guess that's topical as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah.
And you have Mew Mew as well.
Yeah, and Mew Mew. I got Mew Mew up there.
Rest in peace.
So there's a number of yeah, exactly. It's very sad. So I have some Avengers themed things up there, but you can also go to a Geek's Guide to Cross-Stitch.com, which will take you to the Fanbase Press page that announces pre-orders being available for my upcoming book, A Geek's Guide to Cross-Stitch Journeys in Space.
Very excited about
So
that.
space nerdy with needles. Yay.
Well, that wraps things up for this special edition of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. You can find this podcast and many others on the Fanbase Weekly iTunes feed, as well as fanbasepress.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
This has been part of the Fanbase Press Podcast Network.